So hi everyone. I apologize upfront for not being able to attend ISREV in person this year, and in fact I'm hurriedly pre-recording this presentation from LA in California before stepping onto a flight for a work commitment in Thailand. In case my flight back is delayed or clashes with UK local time, this presentation can still be played to you by the session chairperson. In any case, I'll try to be online for questions at the end, even if I'm slightly jet-lagged in my attempt to answer them. The presentation today is going to be about the patterns of growth in the Buddhist population of the UK between the 2001, 2011, and 2021 censuses. It's only since 2001 that a single religious question on affiliation has been included in the UK Census. The Office for National Statistics defines religious affiliation as the religion which people identify with rather than their beliefs or practices. As simplistic interpretation of religion based on the census may lead to nominalism, Leslie Francis in his 2009 chapter warned that religious affiliation may not function as a secure predictor of other dimensions of religiosity. Should a person, for example, be considered a Buddhist merely because they or their parents tick a box once every decade? Although census counts of Buddhists can never be considered synonymous with quantification of Buddhist religiosity, with some caveats, it remains the most accurate snapshot of UK growth or decline of Buddhism currently available. My own 2016 dissertation and also Leslie Francis' recent article on Christian figures in the 2021 UK Census summarize the limitations of census data concerning Buddhists, reminding us that reliance solely on census data may lead us to gloss over active religious practice, denomination, ethnic type, and religious style, as well as hybrid religious affiliation, and cause us to overlook the category of Buddhist sympathizers. Despite these caveats, census data remain of prime importance, not so much as a proxy for religiosity, but as a construct empirical theologians and social scientists evaluate in its own right for its potential to reveal underlying aspects of religiosity and identity, and Beat Halami recognized that they stand as a bridge between the public and private dimensions of religious commitment. So these are crucial points to keep in mind before I start interpreting statistical output from the census. So while mindful of these limitations, I have based the findings of this paper on secondary analysis of publicly available data from 20 years of UK census. And rather than focusing on net numbers of Buddhists in Britain, this paper focuses on the patterns of growth as they have changed between the 2001 to 2011 census and the 2011 to 2021 census, particularly on the local level. Additionally, it should be pointed out that since Buddhists don't have fixed parish boundaries to rely upon for statistical analysis of demographics, the local authority districts of the census, although imperfect as they are, slightly redrawn each year to support statistical reliability, are the closest researchers can come to understanding local Buddhist demographic patterns. So Buddhists continue to be a small minority for self-identified religious affiliation in the UK Census. This first slide shows the Buddhist population size and growth rate together and separately for the 4 nations of the United Kingdom. At the time of writing, the Scottish data for 2021 had not yet been made available, so the Buddhist percentage of the total population has been based on numbers for England and Wales. In 2001, the Office for National Statistics data show that there were 139,046 Buddhists in England, 5,407 in Wales, 6,830 in Scotland, and 533 in Northern Ireland, making a total of 1,816 in the UK, representing 0.28% of the general UK population. In 2011, the Office of National Statistics data show that there were 238,626 Buddhists in England, 9,117 in Wales, 12,795 in Scotland, and 1,046 in Northern Ireland, making for a total of 261,584 in the UK as a whole, and representing 0.4% of the general UK population. The growth in Buddhist population during the period 2001 to 2011 was thus an increase of 71.6% for England, 68.6% for Wales, 87.3% for Scotland, and 96.2% for Northern Ireland, which averaged out as an increase of 72.3% for the UK as a whole, growth which is more than 10 times higher than the general population increase of 7% in the UK during that period. According to the Office of National Statistics, by subgroup analysis in the 2001 census, 2/5 were white or black Buddhists, since the number of Buddhists born within England and Wales, which was 66,522, was outstripped by the number born abroad. So Far East was 59,000, Southeast Asia was 9,847. In 2011, Heritage Buddhism continued to outstrip Convert Buddhism, with the ethnicity of Buddhists reported as white as being only 33.8%, mixed was 4%, and Asian went up to 59.6%, with blacks Buddhists coming in at 1.1%. The other category was 1.5%. Since net numbers in the Buddhist population in the period 2001 to 2011 was small relative to the total population of the UK, it went without media comment, save for the ambiguous claim in the Daily Telegraph that Buddhism was the fastest growing religion in English jails in that decade. The later article on Scottish prisoners in the Daily Record clarified that the numbers of Buddhist prisoners was due to conversion, and this could be interpreted as a credit to the work of the Buddhist prison chaplaincy service, and not because of the delinquency of Buddhists per se. Buddhists in the 2011 census was also noted as being ethnically diverse. 6% were wont to engage in employment while studying. If not economically active, for 33%, it was the result of full-time study. For the 2021 census, the figures that have captured media attention have been the decrease in numbers of those self-identifying as Christian, and the wide variety of new categories of what people consider to be any other religion outside the mainstream categories. So again, as shown on the slide, as of 2021, there were 262,433 Buddhists in England, 10,075 in Wales, and 1,542 in Northern Ireland, representing 0.5% of the general England and Wales population. The growth in Buddhist population during the period in the 2011 to 2021 7 was an increase of 9.9% for England, 10.5% for Wales, and 47.4% for Northern Ireland. Growth which still exceeds that of the general population increased during that period for the UK, which was 6.7%. With the 2021 census, the number of Buddhists in Britain was reported by the Jewish News Syndicate to have overtaken the number of Jews in Britain, whereas in fact the Jewish population remains stable, with Hindu, Sikh and Buddhist populations showing a slight increase along with other religions. Buddhists alongside Muslims had the highest percentage of unpaid carers for 55 to 64-year-olds and those working in elementary occupations. Buddhist ethnicity data were not available for 2021 at the time of writing. As this paper is focusing on the Buddhist demographic, the overall conclusion of the results is that although Buddhism continues to grow in Britain, that overall rate of growth has slowed considerably between 2011 and 2021. Turning to look at localized demographic patterns for Buddhists, the next slide was colorized by me, based on data from the 2012 Office for National Statistics data, following the color scheme used in the 2022 interactive website to facilitate comparison. In terms of percentage of local population, the top 5 highest concentration of Buddhists were Rushmore, which is principally the Gurkhas of Aldershot, which is 3.3% of the population. Greenwich was 1.7%, Kensington and Chelsea 1.5%, Westminster 1.5%, and Hounslow 1.4%. The lowest 5 concentration of Buddhists were Knowsley, North East Derbyshire, West Lancashire, South Holland, and Redcar and Cleveland, all with Buddhists as only 0.1% of the population. In the decade 2001 to 2011, the highest localized rates of growth for the population, as shown in this slide, were Rushmore, which had an increase of 773%, which is pretty incredible. Alnwick had an increase of 502%, increase of 361%. Nuneaton and Bedworth had an increase of 283%, and Basingstoke and Dean had an increase of 263%. So, just for clarity, Rushmore had a 7 times increase, Alnwick had a 5 times increase, and so on. As the highest rates of decline for Buddhists, they were in Wellingborough, where it was a decrease of 18%, Purbeck had a decrease of 15%, Telford and Wrekin had a decrease of 5%, and West Somerset had a decrease of 2%. In conclusion, the general trends for growth in the period 2001 to 2011 were a movement into urban areas. Moving on to the next slide, which is the latest census data from the last 10 years. The localized top 5 highest concentrations of Buddhists were Rushmore again, so that's 4.7% of the population. Greenwich had a 1.7% of the population. Reading had 1.7% of the population. Hounslow had 1.4% of the population. And Westminster had a 1.3% of the population. The lowest 5 local concentration of Buddhists were in the Isles of Scilly, which was only 0.1%, and Hartlepool, Redcar and Cleveland, Holton and Blackburn with Darwin, all only 0.2% of the population. In the decade 2011 to 2021, the highest localized rates for growth of the population, which is again shown in this slide, were Tewkesbury, where it's an increase of 97%, so almost doubled. West Lancashire, which was an increase of 86%, Test Valley was an increase of 86%, Waveney was an increase of 84%, and Dartford an increase of 81%. For the highest rates of decline for Buddhists, these were in Kensington and Chelsea, where there's a decrease of 34%, Amber Valley had a decrease of 34%, Brent had a decrease of 28%, Southwark had a decrease of 24%, and Hackney a decrease of 24%. The 2021 census figures therefore show that a redistributed growth of Buddhist population from the inner city areas to the suburbs or more rural areas. So to try to explain the localized demographic patterns seen in British Buddhists, historically speaking, back in the 1990s, the redistribution of Buddhists in Britain was due to a deliberate government policy of dispersal, for example, of Vietnamese immigrants to the UK to prevent ghettoization. In the present day, however, it seems to be that regardless of government policy, Buddhists have redistributed themselves unaided, possibly out of consideration for what's known as amenable location or Patirupadesa in Buddhism, which figures prominently in the Buddhist scripture. This is a principle by which Buddhists will tend to relocate to places where they perceive it to be amenable to their economic or spiritual flourishing. Possible reasons explored as driving patterns of Buddhist growth in the UK were displacement by push factors, the pandemic lockdown, work from home policy, immigration policy, and the cost of living crisis. So to examine each in turn, starting with displacement by push factors, this might come in the form of incompatibility between Buddhists and members of other religions, such as Hindu, Sikh, or Muslim. I investigated this using the Office of National Statistics online interactive maps and the local growth rate for the period 2011 and 2021. But this was ruled out because none of the areas of highest growth for these religions matched any of the areas of maximum decline for Buddhists in the same period. Similarly, there's no correspondence with the Buddhist decline for factors like ethnicity, overall crime rate. So it's likely that they are not an important factor. The second thing I explored was the work from home policy, because during the pandemic, we were all encouraged to work from home. And many people, as a result, moved out of the cities during the COVID pandemic lockdown so that they could live in a cheaper or more desirable place away from the city centres in more rural locations instead of having to live near to their city offices. This possibility was also ruled out because the relocation of Buddhists from central London districts was to areas such as Hampshire, Surrey, Kent, Swindon, and the M5, so as a motorway corridor, which implied the need for convenient transport rather than working from home. So it's likely that this is not, again, an important factor. Third thing I looked at was immigration policy, and since the Brexit in 2016 and the so-called hostile environment policy towards immigration since 2012, there's been a reduced pull factor for the UK, which has reduced Buddhist immigration. In confirmation of the importance of this factor, I had an interview with a Thai Buddhist informant who related to me her story of having to make 3 attempts to obtain work visas for Thai employees with specialist therapy skills to enter the UK to work at her business, but they all had their visa applications turned down by the UK government. So this is likely to be an important factor in the reduced growth. The last thing I looked for was the cost of living crisis and its effects on the local demographics. And Buddhists appear to have been priced out of the inner city, and this was confirmed again by a Thai Buddhist informant who related how she had recently been forced to relocate from Farnborough, so that's in the London suburbs, to Doncaster up north in England, even though she had invested a lot in her massage parlor because the monthly rent had doubled. So it is likely that it was an important factor. So in conclusion, patterns of localized redistribution of Buddhists in the period 2001-2011 were due to immigration to inner city areas. But owing to the cost of living crisis and hostile immigration policy from 2012 onwards, Buddhists have relocated more recently to suburban areas where overheads are lower. So that was my presentation, but if you'll allow me, I will finish with a brief piece of publicity. And I'd like to say that if any of you in this session are looking for an outlet for your ideas or research on religion or religious education and are able to simplify those ideas to make them interesting for 16 to 18-year-olds religious studies students in the UK, we are looking for 2,000-word articles. And if you're interested to adapt your work in this way, then please contact myself or Professor Jeff Astley to see about getting your work included in an upcoming edition of the Challenging Religious Issues online journal, as we're always seeking for new content. So at this point, I'd like to welcome any questions, comments, or feedback that you may have. Thank you very much for your attention.